So nearly 4 decades after the worst footballing disaster in British history that led to the deaths of 97 people and several hundred more being injured, a new investigation has laid bare just the scale of the police failings and cover-ups that went on at the time. We'll get into all the details of that in just a moment. But before we do, if you do like this channel, and thank you for being here, I really do appreciate your support. I do appreciate all the new subscribers that are coming on board over the last few days. I appreciate all the comments on the other videos. I do read your comments. I do comment on them where I can do. So please do comment below and come and join us here. Thanks very much for being here. I do appreciate it. Okay, so getting back into it. So the Hillsborough disaster. For those of you who don't know or weren't alive then, I was only 14 myself at the time. The Hillsborough disaster was a horrendous, loss of human life. At a football match between Liverpool and Sheffield Wednesday, where 97 fans were effectively crushed to death in the stands of the Sheffield Wednesday stadium, and in Hillsborough. So I'm going to get into that. I think what I'm going to do is actually show you the video, just so you get the full context of it, so you understand what really happened on the day. Now, I do warn you, this is a bit distressing. It can be difficult to watch. It's about 3 minutes long, so if you want to skip 3 minutes forward, that's absolutely fine. I'm going to just move over to the page now. So you see this is a video we're going to watch, the Hillsborough disaster, how it happened in 1989. This is by On Demand News, but there are various other outlets who have done this at the same time as well. So I'm just going to play this for you now. I'm just going to mute my mic 1 second.
That sounds like a
really
really
like any build-up to a big game. At 2:24, Liverpool fans are seen making the journey by foot from the station to the stadium.
Absolutely, that's a good way to give viewers the context.
Kick-offs in half an hour, and people are tightly packed at the turnstile entrance to the Lettings Lane terrace.
Exactly. Narrating those details, you're really helping your viewers understand.
CCTV footage, which was being monitored by police that day, shows how the crowd outside was growing by the minute.
Exactly, and by pointing that out, you're really painting a clear...
The two centre pens of the terrace were packed, but people were in good spirits.
Absolutely, and that really shows how...
That's at 2:40, the first real sign that things were going badly wrong, with a young boy lifted clear from the crush.
Absolutely, and by pointing that out, you're really capturing that turning point.
Superintendent Roger Marshall, who was a police officer in charge outside the ground, is clearly worried. He later said he feared fatalities could occur.
Exactly, and including that detail...
Inside, everyone was heading to the jammed centre pens, despite there being plenty of room in the pens at either end of the terrace. 2:52, with the crowds building and kick-off drawing closer, the police made the decision to open the exit gate. Over the course of 5 minutes, 2,000 fans streamed through, with most of them heading straight to the centre pens.
And the match is on with Liverpool in red playing from...
Just a couple of minutes into the game, it became clear something was wrong behind the Liverpool goal. It seems initially police thought it was a pitch invasion.
Exactly.
But soon people were collapsing on both sides of the fence.
Absolutely, and that really underscores how quickly things escalated.
At 3 minutes, police ordered the players off the pitch. But it still seemed they hadn't grasped the scale of the tragedy unfolding before their eyes.
Exactly, and that really highlights how chaotic...
It wasn't until 3 that the first medic, a St John's ambulance volunteer, climbs over the fence onto the terrace. By then, people had already died or were dying. At the back and front of the pen, supporters were trampled in the desperation. Others tried to get out however they could. Then, at 3:16, the first ambulance arrived pitchside. But that was already too late for 96 fans.
Absolutely.
So that's very sobering, isn't it? Very, very sobering. And it was actually 97. Another one took several years to die of their injuries afterwards. And several hundred more were injured. Okay, and at the time, the police tried to blame this on the fans themselves. They said that the Liverpool fans were coming in drunk, that they were poorly behaved, that there was bad behaviour going on, and the and really tried to blame it on them and say it was their fault. No, there was no evidence for this whatsoever, but it is what they tried to do. So it's so I'm going to bring you now to the report that's just come out today. The report that's come out today. Again, it's quite hard reading some of this stuff. So this one, I'm going to bring you to this one here. So this one, so the Hillsborough report finds police guilty of complacency, failure and concerted effort to blame fans. We'll go into more detail on this in just a moment. So 13 officers would have faced misconduct investigations after a series of failings by police before, during and after the disaster. The IOPC, which is the Independent Office of Police Conduct, says that no one will be held to account. The report is a bitter injustice for bereaved relatives. Now, why is no one being held to account? Because they've all been retired, or they've all left their jobs, or they've died since then, unfortunately. And so there have been over the years a number of investigations, reports done, things that have come about this, and then right afterwards in 1990 there was a Taylor report. Taylor report again it brought up some identification of police failures at the time, and it led to major changes in stadium safety, including having all-seater stadiums. I don't know if you noticed in the video, getting rid of those railings around the football pitches as well. Now, back in the 80s, we used to have a lot of problems with pitch invasions, and to prevent pitch invasions, they used to put those railings around the pitch itself, so the fans couldn't get onto the pitch. And as we saw from that video briefly, that what happened there was all these fans just surged forward, and they got crushed against these railings at the front. It was a horrendous failure of those people in charge to ensure the safety of the crowds at the time, and also horrendous loss of life and tragedy for all those involved. And in fact, it's taken almost 40 years for the truth to really get out about this. It's just horrendous, So in 1990, the Taylor report identified that. Then again, we had another one, the Hillsborough Independent Panel, the 2012 report that exposed the cover-ups that led to the new inquest. Now, the 2016 inquest was the longest inquest that's ever been held in British history. And it ruled in the end that all 97 fans had been unlawfully killed, which was significant because prior to that, the police were blaming the people. They're blaming the fans. They're blaming everybody apart from themselves. And they were unlawfully killed due to effectively poor management and negligence by the groundsmen and the police at the time. So I'm going to go into details now about what this report found. So let's go back to our browser. So key findings from this, rather than having to go through it all myself, we're going to have a look at this. In 1989, crowds at Hillsborough, 97 deaths and 766 injured. That's just horrendous, isn't it? Nearly 1,000 people. And the trauma of that lasted for years for the families, for those who were there, for the nation as a whole. As I was a child at the time, it was a very, very significant day. For everybody involved, really. Everyone around at the time. So this is the South Yorkshire Police intensely presented unsubstantiated evidence. This is IA saying that it was basically Liverpool fans' fault. And the IOPC has been probing the 1989 tragedy since 2012. So it's taken 13 years worth of investigations to get to this report that's come out today. Now I find this staggering. It's 13 years. And bear in mind, even then it was still 20 odd years after the event itself. 23 years after the event itself. And so to get to this point now where we're 36 years down the line and still the truth is only uncovering now, it's a bit shocking. And as we'll go through in here, it's quite damning against the police. Dozens of allegations of misconduct against several officers have been upheld, but none will face disciplinary proceedings because they've all left the police service before investigation began, the IOPC said. I don't know how this works legally for speaking, but I think there ought to be some legal culpability of some of these people involved at the time. It is what it is. No, I don't know the law on this fact, and I wouldn't like to say what could happen, but it just seems very unjust that effectively no one's being held to account for what happened there on that day. And not saying that one person's necessarily to blame, but it was a systemic failing across the board. We just watched the video there, we don't need to go through it again. So here are the key findings. Okay, so it's like the safety of the stadium. And this is a collage of all the people that passed away, unfortunately. Very, very tragic indeed. And so these were people just cut across in a prime due to the failings of the authorities. So, safety of the stadium. The report found that the safety capacity of the stands where the tragedy unfolded was based upon incorrect calculations. An engineering expert looking at safety standards of 1989 said that the West Terrace should have had a capacity of no more than 4,500 and perhaps as low as 3,000, but instead it had a capacity of over 7,200. Well, I don't know how this went through, and again, it's looking at the safety standards of 1989, it's not today's safety standards. That's significant. But it said a larger calculation from 1979 wasn't revisited when changes are made that left less space for fans. Some alarm have been, something have been drawn here looking at safety standards, and perhaps there are too many people on board. No one did anything about it, so that's what it was. And now police had recommended changes to Lepping Lane's entrance of the stadium. They were not made because they were rejected as being too expensive. And as a result, nearly 1,000 people died or lost or were injured as a result. Now, on the Leppings Lane, there are 7 turnstiles and served 10,100 Liverpool fans with standing tickets. So we didn't have all seating tickets in those days. That was a new thing that came out as a result of the original Taylor inquiry. That stadiums were converted to seating only. So it was not clear that the report author wrote that the police understood the potential consequences of this. Now, I think it's probably safe to say they probably didn't understand that they had 10,000 people going towards styles that could only handle 750 per hour, and towards a stadium that wasn't big enough, effectively. They clearly hadn't looked at the whole thing overall. They didn't really understand it as a combined picture. As we'll come to in a minute, that they weren't very good in the 80s about having combined emergency responses and planning for stuff. Fortunately today, as a result of things like this, the planning has become much better and much more effective and much more coordinated. But it wasn't the case in the 1980s when this happened. Supporters... we saw what happened. We don't need to go through the details of it there. There is a bit of a timeline on here, which I was scrolling through just now. Again, you can have a look at this in your own time if you want to. I'll put a link to this article in the comments. What I found shocking there, that the match wasn't stopped before it even started. That the police gave the go-ahead for the match, despite the fact that there were problems at each entrance. And it seemed the police inside and outside the stadium weren't communicating with each other. And it said that the match kicks off at 2:59. And it was at 3:02. Roger Greenwood sees a crush at pen 3 and asks for supporters to move to the back. At 3:05, the match is stopped. At 3:05, again, officers in the police control box instruct all other officers to go to the Leppings Lane end of the stadium. But it turns out they didn't know what for. At 3:07, a fleet of ambulances is requested to be sent to the stadium. But it turns out that no one knew what they were going for, no one knew what was going on, they didn't know what was happening there. And there weren't enough ambulances sent. We saw in that video that St John's ambulance, which would have been on site at the time, but St John's ambulance was the first to turn up on scene, No, so they're basically volunteers, ambulance service. They're in no way equipped to deal with huge medical emergencies like that one. And then when they did arrive, no, there weren't enough ambulances to cope with it initially. So it says the IOPC concluded that with no central organisation of these rescue efforts, it was left loose on the pitch to make decisions the best they could. Now, I mean, it must have been horrendous. No, they couldn't see necessarily what was going on. They didn't realise that people were being crushed to death. They didn't realise, what was happening at the back and the front of the stadium. No one seemed to be in control. No, and least of all the police. And we could understand to some extent, that there wasn't proper communication. That there was inefficient planning and safety measures in place. All of which are negligent in my opinion. But nevertheless, constantly 40 years ago, although no football matches were managed and safety was managed in those okay in those days as well. But anyway, moving on. So police found no evidence of report found no evidence of police using their truncheons on supporters or physically preventing fans from escaping their pens. There were lots of allegations made on both sides, that turned out probably not to be true in some cases. About the police planning, so it argued that the planning for the fateful day was broadly the same as it had been for other matches of the same teams. But the IOPC found that actually there were 14% reduction in the number of officers on duty and 21% fewer in the area where the Liverpool fans were expected to arrive. And several fans commented that there was a lack of control compared to previous year's games. There was no contingency planning for across on the West Terrace, and that the police divisions deployed to the game were not coordinating with each other. 3 different police divisions were not coordinating with each other. So it goes on to say that South Yorkshire Police made a poorly timed decision to replace its previously highly experienced match commander. Now, for some reason, and no one knows why, they changed the person that was in charge on the day. And they put this David Duckenfield guy in place. And he was charged with gross conduct manslaughter, I think it was called. Basically causing manslaughter by gross misconduct. But that charge was later dropped, I think, a couple of 3 years ago now. So that didn't stick in the end. He was found not guilty of that. Okay, so let's move forward. So Duckenfield, referring to a very limited set of predetermined criteria, chose not to delay kick-off and did not consider the turnstile count as a part of the decision-making process. So it shows that he was woefully inexperienced for the job in hand here. He hadn't done the job before, he hadn't been trained in the job, and it was a very, very busy match. It was FA Cup semi-final. Should have been someone with experience on duty, in my opinion. Absolutely should have been. Okay, and it went on to say about the gates and the gates not being open at the right time. So this is where it starts getting interesting. Okay, so after the disaster, 327 officers were asked to produce a written account of the day, including sharing their fears, feelings and observations and comments on the moods of the fans. A number have previously said their accounts were amended without their agreement, and the IOPC found somewhat uncomfortable with the changes and were pressured to accept an amended version. So this is the police altering their own records. The records of officers that were on duty at the time, recording in their pocket notebooks, as they are bound to do. And these records were being amended and altered, and the reports were being changed by those higher up in the command to try and shift the blame away from the police. And then the new report also states that a number of accounts that were amended is more than 100 higher than previously thought. So a lot. There's a lot of these things were changed afterwards. All previous allegations made in a report to the Hillsborough Independent Panel in 2012 claimed the South Yorkshire police officers were instructed not to write about their actions on the day in pocket notebooks, in contrast to professional training. Now, this is suggesting that they were specifically instructed not to record any details of the things that were going on that day in their notebooks. Quite why only those that made those decisions will know. And my personal opinion is it's like it was trying to cover up what has turned out to be massive police failings on the day. Okay, so moving on again. So the IOPC obtained more than 8,000 pocket notebooks from relevant periods. 359 were found to include entries related to the disaster. So 359 were found entries. Okay, so they've got 8,000 notebooks of the officers on duty or that came to deal with it all. And 359 had entries relating to the data. So even though they were told not to record it, 359 people did. The new report also found no evidence that supporters' behaviour caused or in any way contributed to the disaster. It was a huge indictment to the fans, that it was, just to be before being blamed on them for many, many years. I know it's really, really important that this is, reiterated time and time again that the fans were not at fault in it. It was predominantly a policing failure that came on here. They say they tried to fight it off on alcohol consumption. There was no evidence of this whatsoever, particularly in the early stages of the game. So nonetheless, it also said that some of the earliest evidence collected by police seemed to be focused on alcohol consumption, with officers taking photos of bins and collecting rubbish nearby, and usually picture of rubbish bin below here. And they're also testing blood alcohol of the deceased, which I find abhorrent. Does it matter that someone has been crushed to death, what their blood alcohol content was? I was somehow trying to blame the people that got murdered or got killed. Be careful what words I used here, by this unfortunate accident. I'm trying to find appropriate words to use here. They seem to be focused on blaming the people that had died rather than the people that caused the deaths, and then trying to blame the people that had died for them dying, effectively. And again, there's some story about horse being burnt with cigarettes. Recorded as not only improbable but implausible. Then the Conservative MP at the time, Irving Patrick, MP for Sheffield Hallam, was identified as a source of the stories, which painted supporters in a negative light, having repeated accounts he'd heard from police officers. So the MP reported this publicly and was blaming Liverpool fans. Police officers had to put the story out. This story also got picked up by the media, and particularly The Sun at the time, ran a big story, effectively blaming the fans for their own death, and for the carnage at the ground, even though it wasn't the case. It was massively, fell for the story put out there by the police and by that MP. So it goes on. The police treated the deceased in a way of lack of compassion and unnecessarily rigid, the report found. Well, that goes without saying, doesn't it? They blamed the fans for a long time for it. And then it goes on and on and on. So we go further down with that. And then it turns out that West Midlands Police were then brought in to investigate South Yorkshire Police. West Midlands Police were alerted to accounts of the disaster being amended. They did not take action to prevent it. It doesn't quite say that West Midlands Police were complicit in this amendment of information, or sometimes better known as possibly a cover-up. But West Midlands Police didn't, in my opinion, police properly. They didn't do their job in investigating, in other words. Again, that's my personal opinion. And they should have, at the time, looked into this far more detailed. But no, I think quite often you see that one side of the police covers up the other side of the police, or same thing in government. One part of government covers up the other side of government when there's an investigation. They will gloss over the awkward things, to that make our colleagues feel uncomfortable. So there are very few comments about alcohol were found in the statements collected, but the investigators, this is by West Midlands Police, appear to have reached a view that alcohol was a key factor in the disaster. West Midlands Police also ran criminal records checks on 94 of those who died. So why? Why the bloody hell would you need to know the criminal records of dead people that had been crushed to death trying to attend a football match? Again, it seems like blame shifting going on there to me. It said 2 of these victims were under the age of 18 and the youngest being 10. IOPC said for the most part the force interviewed witnesses professionally and it adhered, this is West Midlands Police now, to the professional standards at the time when investigating complaints, but ultimately made several criticisms of West Midlands Police, including failing to approach key witnesses and failing to gather its own statements from South Yorkshire police officers. So rather than doing a proper independent investigation and investigating like you should do criminally, they went to their mates, and I use that term casually, they went to their mates and they said, what do you say about it? And the mate said something and they go, okay mate, that's what we'll say. And so that's not an investigation, is it? That's just like, okay, tell us the story you want and we'll tell your story. And that's it. That's not an investigation. That is just a cover-up, in my opinion. I'm going to say it as it is. So that's what that is. And you're on about shifting the blame again. I tried to blame it on other people apart from the consistent patterns in the forces, failures in the force, rather. So South Yorkshire Police consistently and intentionally presented unsubstantiated evidence. This is massive, so South Yorkshire Police consistently and intentionally presented unsubstantiated evidence. It also altered the evidence of officers before it was submitted by amending their accounts. Now, this is the police force, the people who were supposed to be protecting us. Now, South Yorkshire Police, it's not the first time they're coming on to bother, is it? But and I'm not the police because they do a good job a lot of the time, in keeping us safe and under difficult circumstances. But sometimes there are blatant failings. There is corruption, and it takes a long time for it to come out sometimes. And this is outrightly corrupt, in my opinion. That here, there was no evidence that West Midlands Police had tried to deflect the blame away from police, so though their investigation was flawed and narrow. Okay, well that's interesting, isn't it? Because it didn't try to shift it away from the police, but it took on face value what officers may have told, and those officers have been found to be amending, let's put it that way, statements previously made. So make of it what you will, make of it what you will. And then it goes on to list a whole load of police officers that were in it, and particularly this David Duckenfield, like I said before, he had this attempted, not manslaughter, but manslaughter by, whatever the word is, I can't remember it now, but it, he had to face those charges, and, he got off for that, rightly or wrongly. And unfortunately, it says that failing to plan adequately to prevent the disaster. This is the guy in charge. Failing to control the movement of supporters subsequent to the opening of Gate C. Failing to monitor crowd numbers in pens. Failing to act when it became obvious that the pens were too full despite having an excellent viewpoint. It's a great point, isn't it? You saw what was happening. Why didn't you do anything about it? Failing to respond to the developing tragedy and being slow to coordinate a rescue operation. So he was effectively never done this job before. He was put in at the deep end. He'd not been trained. I have to say, I think his superiors who put him in this position were probably equally culpable, or probably more culpable in some ways, from this, because they shouldn't have put someone that didn't know what they were doing in charge. And it goes on. They're failing to act when people were in distress, and then lying about his order to open Gate C, suggesting supporters had forced the gate open. And again, all other ones here, failing to adequately plan, failing to control the movement of supporters, failing the way that they responded in events down here, failing to monitor crowd numbers. And it goes on and on and on and on. Anyway, I'll post this in the comments if you want to read it. I know we've gone for long enough, I think. But what is tragic here? Not only has it taken almost 4 decades for these reports to come out, 4 decades of these families going through the repeated traumas of having to give evidence, of seeing these things come through, of being stressed out, Having their loved ones blamed for something they didn't do, and then to find out that the 12, 15 people that were most responsible can't be charged for it, or not going to be charged, not going to lose their jobs because they're already not working anymore. They're not going to face any kind of prosecution or inquiry any further. I feel that is somewhat unjust, and I think it really does highlight the need consistently to question the official narrative and official story on just about everything we ever see. When we consider this is the police lying, it was reported in the media, and the media were then lying, or reporting incorrectly, if we're going to use a slightly more correct term, but I'm going to be direct with it. That the media re-reported lies and untruths. It was disinformation at its worst. It was corruption at best, maybe. But we need all the time to be asking the questions, who benefits from us believing what they want us to believe? Who benefits from that? In the case of South Yorkshire Police back in 1989, they would benefit from shifting the blame to supporters and away from them. And they thought they were going to get away with it because they were the police. And to all intents and purposes, they have got away with it. They might have been blamed for it. But sadly, it means nothing, does it? It means nothing when there is no personal accountability. And I find this is a big problem with our system, and particularly in politics and in policing across the board. There's no personal accountability for anything. And I really think that if politicians had personal accountability for things that happen as a result of their policies and things that they do and they say, they would pass far better quality laws and far better quality legislation, things that affect us. If they were personally liable for the fallout of those things, and those people and ministers in those government and those people in those cabinets could be criminally prosecuted for death due to starvation on universal credit, for example, or through any other laws that cause death or suffering to people. And I think there should be some personal accountability, and I think it would mean that there'd be far fewer laws passed and far more effective legislation going through. But ultimately, question everything, believe face value of nothing. Really, really important. Seek the truth whenever you can. Keep talking about it, like these Hillsborough victims' families have done. Keep that flame burning until the truth eventually comes out. And it may be 40 years later, and it may be that there's no one that's going to pay a criminal price for this. But to some extent, justice has been served. The truth has come out, and the truth being out is better than truth not being out. Even if no one's going to prison for it, in my opinion. Right, guys, let me know. I appreciate you bearing with me. A long one again. I appreciate you bearing with me all this whole time. Please do comment below. Let me know if you got to the end of this. Do comment end or something in the comment, and leave what your thoughts are on it. What your thoughts are about Hillsborough, the Hillsborough disaster, and following things from that. Hopefully you haven't got a family that was affected by it. And a lot of people do have. And if you do, please leave a comment below as well. And greatest respect to you guys that have been personally affected for persevering for so bloody long to get the truth out. Man, I take my hat off to you. Until next time, bye bye.